So I'm seeing the insurance company revert back to where they were 8-10 years ago. They're being lazier and lazier, and they're being more, I guess the word is selfish or maybe cheap, and they're being more aggressive in denying these cases again. And the in-house doctors, I mean, they have a level of bias because they're paid by the, I mean, their salaries are paid by the insurance company. So when your salary is paid by, when your employer is the one who has to pay the benefits, if you're writing reports to help a denial, you're helping your employer save money, which helps them pay your salary. So they have an inherent bias to favor a denial. So I'm seeing more and more reviews done only by employees of the insurance companies. That's just totally wrong.
Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell, joined by attorney Jessup and Alex Palamara. And guys, let's talk in this video about disability denial trends in 2025. We're already filming this video in the beginning of April, so we've started to see what's going on this year. And we can talk about what we continue to expect to see because it's always evolving. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I think it's evolving and different every year is because disability insurance companies are continuously reevaluating their internal operations. They're setting their targets, they're setting their goals, they're thinking about, what did we do last year? What can we do better as a disability insurance company to potentially reduce our approval rate or manage our claims or how we look at the claims? I don't necessarily think that they sit there and go, this year we've got to deny, 20% of our claims and we can only approve 80%. I'd like to believe in good faith that if they had 100% of the people that applied, that they would approve them. That's not how they look at it. More so, the way that they're trained internally to look at it is, how can we review a claim such that we're able to prove that there's not enough evidence here to support a claim? And I believe that's the way that they can almost put a mask over it and look at these claims and be like, this is how we're going to justify a denial. Whereas we look at a claim and say, what evidence do we need to prove that this person is disabled? They're looking the other way and say, what evidence is not there? And sadly, almost every time from every company, not to discriminate against one company or the other, the disability denial letters will talk about what's not there and things that could almost never be there because it's not the kind of evidence that could be in existence. For example, when the disability insurance companies say, well, your subjective complaints don't match the objective evidence, and they'll talk about somebody who has a medical condition like a fibromyalgia or a chronic fatigue, and they'll just say, there's no objective evidence. Well, there's not going to be objective evidence for that. So how do you even go about saying that? Or, yes, we agree that you had a heart attack, and now we see your ejection fraction rate is normal, your blood pressure is normal, the diagnostic testing we're doing is normal. Why are you still suffering? Why are you still having fatigue? Why are you still having limitations doing your activities? Again, your subjective complaints don't match the objective. So that's always been there as that kind of denial. I think that's probably one of my number one denial trends that I see year after year. I continue to see that in 2025. But there's other reasons too that we see, like in terms of changes in management in different companies, as a reason for why are they being more aggressive. So, Alex, talk about what's coming to you top of mind for the most recent denials that you're seeing in 2025.
I mean, the last potential I just reviewed their denial letter, and I just sent them a contract to represent. I saw in-house reviews only. They're not even using external doctors to do a review of the case. So when I say internal doctors, I'm saying they're employees of the insurance company. So I'm seeing the insurance company revert back to where they were 8-10 years ago. They're being lazier and lazier, and they're being more, I guess the word is selfish or maybe cheap, and they're being more aggressive in denying these cases again. And the in-house doctors, I mean, they have a level of bias because they're paid by their salaries are paid by the insurance company. So when your salary is paid by, when your employer is the one who has to pay the benefits, if you're writing reports to help a denial, you're helping your employer save money, which helps them pay your salary. So they have an inherent bias to favor a denial. So I'm seeing more and more reviews done only by employees of the insurance companies. That's just totally wrong. So whenever the person I last spoke to before we started filming today, I just saw, I go, listen, just reviewing your denial, the first thing that jumped out to me was the fact that reviews they're relying upon are two internal doctors. It was a they call him a medical director, and it was the term they use for the other person, but they're both, they don't name the person, they don't give the person's name, so they're a hidden person, but they're both employees of the insurance company. So it's already a biased report going in there. Now, I don't have those reports yet. As soon as a client signs up, I'm going to get a copy of the claim file, and I'll get those reports and be able to tear through those reports. And I know they're going to be BS bias reports. That's one thing I'm seeing. I'm seeing less and less. I rarely see surveillance. I'm seeing surveillance on cases, maybe 1 out of 40 cases now. I used to see surveillance more often, maybe 1 out of 20 cases, maybe 1 out of 10 cases back in the day. Seeing maybe 1 out of 40 cases I'm ever seeing surveillance.
So you're seeing less surveillance.
Less surveillance than
and
that.
Why do you think that is?
It's easier just to do an online search on social media stuff. They do the full LexisNexis stuff, and they'll get not only you, I've also seen spouses, children's, they'll get what they can get. And I think, ever since COVID, when, people weren't out and about, so it didn't make sense to do video surveillance, they turn to this going and seeing what the online footprint and presence looks like.
Facebook. People have their Facebook, Instagram, and you're giving them all the information anyways, right? So they can save thousands of dollars. I mean, surveillance is probably costing them $1,000
Yeah,
per day.
it's
why even
expensive.
spend that money, but they're doing less and less surveillance.
Because the claimants are doing the surveillance for them.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And, people will say, well, that's how I am on my good days. I'm like, that's the presentation you're giving not only to your friends and families in the world, but your insurance company. So it's very dangerous.
I always tell people, I tell my kids all the time, I say it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and a second to ruin it. And that applies in the disability insurance context, because like you just said, if they catch you doing one particular thing that's inconsistent with an activity that either you told your doctors you couldn't do, or it just doesn't look like you should be able to do that activity based upon all of the complaints and restrictions and limitations you're giving, then the carrier just gives you zero credibility.
The appearance of impropriety
Right.
can really destroy a case.
Steve, what trends are coming to mind for you that you've been seeing?
I've seen more, I guess I'll call it response, no response, where in the actual review leading up, they'll reach out to every doctor. And now I'm seeing more and more where it seems like, we've talked to like clients have like 10, 15, 20 doctors they've consulted with, and the insurance companies blanket putting out the letters with the full, opinions of their doctors. We want your response. Please write back to us. And I'm seeing where one doctor who isn't even related to the disability claim, right, saying, oh, I have no opinion, I haven't put any restrictions and limitations. That's the one response that they'll get. And they'll say, well, the doctor's not giving any restrictions, and we didn't hear back from any of your other doctors, so we're going to go with ours. And that's another thing sometimes I think about too is, when they're asking who you're treating for your disabling condition, you got to be very careful in who you're saying, because some doctors, you had a consult, but they have no opinion. And if they respond, now the insurance company is shaping a narrative of, this doctor said they weren't restricting you in any way, or they don't believe there are any. That's what our doctor's saying. We didn't hear from any of your other doctors, so it's reasonable for us to rely on our doctors and your one doctor.
So I want to give you a perfect example of that. I could give you a ton like that because I am seeing that all the time. For example, I had a patient who's in remission from cancer, treated up at Sloan Kettering in New York. Moves down to Florida or goes back and forth and just decides, let me see if I'm going to get a consult with a University of Miami, Florida oncologist. Goes in for a consult, has the visit. He'd been treating with the Sloan Kettering doctor for 6 years. Who does Unum send their request to determine restrictions and limitations? They go to the one-time consult with the Florida doctor and say, do you have any restrictions and limitations for this particular claimant? He says, no. He didn't go there. Our client didn't go there to get evaluated for restrictions and limitations. He just went there to say, I'm in remission, God bless. I'm going to follow with a new oncologist. They didn't talk about what his restrictions and limitations. They just talked about, do you have cancer or not?
That's when you hope the doctor just doesn't respond.
Right.
Or what they do when they reach out to that doctor, they say, our doctors believe that, your patient would be capable of insert sedentary, physical demands. Would you agree?
Right.
And they'll be like, well, yeah, I mean, lifting 10 pounds a case, yeah, that's real severe. Yeah, I agree with that. And then all of a sudden, well, his job was this. So then they deny based on that. So the insurance companies have their ways of tricking doctors in a lot of ways, or asking questions that most doctors would agree with, because you're not getting into the nitty-gritty about asking, hey, clients' functional abilities and things of that nature. Or in your situation, they don't even really know the patient that well.
And the forms are biased as well. The forms only give sedentary, light, medium, heavy. They don't give less than sedentary. There's never an option for that.
And it doesn't matter what your condition is. If it's physical, it's a one-size-fits-all form.
And I've seen changes in the forms in 2025 where they're making them like less space to give your answer and more generic, so that it creates more of an opportunity for a claimant to kind of not provide the information that the carrier needs, and another opportunity for the doctor. They make it like the doctor should just say minimal information, but then they eat the doctor up for saying, you didn't give us significant restrictions and limitations. So it's like, damn if you do, damn if you don't. But that's another plan that they're doing, is they're re-reviewing these claimant statements, whether it's the APS or the claimant's form. Another thing that I'm seeing, and I guess it gets into this, almost everybody now, with the exception of maybe the psychologists and psychiatrists, and maybe even they're on board, is all digital notes, now from the doctor's offices. Remember, for many years, we'd get these records and we'd be like, what the hell? What does this even say? I can't even read this. And now I think there's some kind of mandate out there that it's required to have digital medical records. Maybe it's because the insurance companies, the health insurance companies, are requiring that for reimbursement or whatever. But I'm seeing a lot of problems develop with those digital medical records, because a lot of these doctors are using software, right? And they either, when you've been to the doctor, they're transcribing in, and then maybe the software fills it out, or they sit there at their computer because they're required to, and they input in the information. But what's happening is it's basically a cut and paste from either the initial visit to the next visit to the next visit to the next visit. And if something isn't checked off appropriately, because a lot of these forms ask a lot of different questions. So, for example, if you're someone who's going in there and you're saying, I'm having numbness in my hands or radiating pain down my arm, there's always a question in there, is the patient reporting numbness or radiating pain? Well, maybe it wasn't there on the first visit, right? Or maybe the doctor missed it on the first visit. Well, what happens is the doctors, they just don't have the time to go through these 55 plus questions every single time that the claimant goes in and start checking off every box. It doesn't work like that, because doctors treat the patient, not the chart. So when they get in there, they're just listening to the patient and they're telling them what they need to do. But what the disability company is doing is they're reading the medical records. And so when they get these medical records back, and the medical records are basically like, well, you didn't complain of any numbness, you didn't complain of any radiating pain, the doctor says your flexion and extension has no limitations, then they're like, your medical records don't support your complaints. So the message and the trend that I would give to people is, ask your doctor for a copy of the medical records every single time you go in for a visit. If they tell you, hey, it's going to be transcribed, call the next day or go onto a portal or whatever it is and get them, and review them and make sure everything you said and told your doctor is in there. And more importantly than that, is there any inconsistencies in there? Because how often do you guys, whether we're doing an appeal or we get records from a client and the client says to you, I didn't tell the doctor that, or I told the doctor this, why isn't it in there? I told him that every single time. And it's a surprise to them. But the problem is, in what we do, is we can't rewrite history. We're married to what we have. So that is part of what we do in our job, is we try to then go back to the doctor and kind of try to recreate what happened in the past and get them to agree that the symptoms are consistent and have always been there. But when we get a claim usually and we're doing an appeal or a denial, we're married to what has happened in the past. So the big tip I would say to avoid a long-term disability denial is look at your medical records every time. And, and if it's not in there, go back to the doctor. We also talk about, guys, bringing in a list, with your symptoms of what's going on, having a checklist as to what's going on with you, or keeping a log of what your symptoms are on a daily basis. Share it with the doctor. Ask them to possibly attach it to the medical records. The more documentation you have, the better you are. And the disability insurance companies are going to see that, and then they're going to have specific, they can't claim you didn't do this. Alex, I'll go to you. What are you seeing on the trend about patients not taking medication? In terms of, like, they have a diagnosis, but they're not taking painkillers, or they're not taking antidepressants, or they're not taking something. So therefore, the disability insurance company throws it back to you and say, well, it can't be that severe because you're not taking this type of medicine?
Well, to be quite honest with you, I don't see that very often, but I do have some clients that cannot afford medication. So I do see clients not taking medications because they can't afford it, and it does get thrown in their faces. Like, so you didn't fill this prescription. So if you're not filling the prescription, you obviously don't have a need for the pain medication. So you must be, not having that level of pain, and thus you're either exaggerating your symptoms when you're speaking with your doctor, or this, that, and the other. That's what I'm. But it doesn't happen on a very. I've never had really happen on a very high level occasion where an insurance company throws it in my face where someone's not filling a prescription.
Yeah, I would agree. And then also I do see where, especially in chronic pain conditions, people do not want to touch opioids. They don't want to deal with that. So it's like, I don't want to take this medication because there's a whole host of risks that come with it. And then the insurance company, again, makes the same argument, well, it can't be that bad. That's why even like in places where there is medical marijuana, initially there was some pushback from the insurance companies, but they do seem to accept that as a course of treatment for certain conditions. But, I do see where people don't want to be on, or some of your clients would take like, 20, medications a day. They just get sick of doing it all.
Rightfully so, because there is people can get addicted to opioids for sure. There was a big epidemic, the last 10, 15 years. So I have seen people push back, like clients do push back on taking such.
So I want to get your guys' opinion. We've talked about this before in the office, but we're completely, we're over COVID. But with COVID came the birth of telemedicine. I don't know about the birth, but became the norm, right? Obviously during COVID. And telemedicine, for purposes of convenience, has continued in many practices. How is telemedicine visits, and for people who don't know what I'm talking about, telemedicine is you do a remote visit with your doctor, whether it's via phone or a Zoom or, an online video conference with the doctor. Are disability insurance companies saying like, oh, this is not necessarily acceptable, you didn't go? Are they starting now kind of like the return to work trend? Is there going to be this return to office trend for patients because it's maybe moving away from, being the norm of telemedicine?
I feel I've seen in the medical record or in the denial letters them seemingly being a little bit critical of Zoom or telehealth.
They bring it up. They reference you had a telemedicine with this doctor, but they don't say this to other ones. So I would agree that they're bringing it up there.
They look down upon it. I believe they do.
Now they will accept it, but I would agree that in their own way, they're not as prioritizing as much. I think where you may not see as much of an issue is on the mental health side, like a therapist that way. But it's real hard to get an orthopedic exam or any type of physical exam through a Zoom link. So where they kind of discredit what may be done there. And I think it's also important too for getting in with the doctor, especially if these are the doctors that are going to be completing forms and their records are going to go towards your claim, that there is more of that personal relationship with the doctor. You meet with the doctor, the effort to get there, the time in the room with the doctor to be able to have those conversations. I would think that carries more weight. And I agree with Alex that the insurance companies, without saying it, are the way that they're kind of doing things are indicating that as well.
Yeah, I believe that we're heading that way also. And I think that patients and, our clients and long-term people that have been following our channel should really be looking to say, I know I was doing that telemedicine. These are more on the physical type issues. I'm totally okay with all the people who have psychiatric treatment. I don't think you have to be sitting in front of your psychologist or social worker or whatever it may be. But if you have a physical condition and the doctor needs to objectively evaluate you, the other reason I really like it better for our clients to go back into the doctor, and I think it's better, is that we always argue to the disability insurance company, how did you make an opinion on our patient just reviewing their records? Look, I know it's different because our clients are still talking to the doctor, but it's not the same as being in the presence, seeing muscle spasms, really observing the effort that the person's taking and being in that presence. And we kind of lose that advantage in a certain way to say, our patient went in, saw the doctor multiple times, was in the presence of the doctor touched and felt the patient and knows you did nothing. You're just looking at the paper. You didn't even bother to contact the client. So I think you lose that aspect, if you don't go in.
Yeah, and some insurance companies, prior to making decisions, they'll have nurses, and part of the review, speak with the claimant, the insured, and ask them these things, which is really no different than what you would get in a telemedicine. So I think that's a really good point about losing some of the oomph of your argument.
Some of my clients, it is financial. Some of my clients, it is distance. But I try to tell them, if it is financial or distance, at least try to get there every other time. You know what I mean? Just so you have the best of both worlds. So you're still treating remotely, you're still treating in person as much as you possibly can afford and can to do so based on your distance.
And the last question I'll throw out to you guys is, we always talk about this in the beginning of the year because we see companies reevaluate what they're doing. Are you seeing more or less denials, same amount of denials this year in 2025 compared to 2024? I know it's different with every company, but where are you seeing it generally?
You know, it's tough because I feel like towards the end of every year you go, wow, that was a busy year, you know, so there it kind of blends in. But I noticed last year, I think, you know, we even spoke about it, where normally you see a kind of a lot of things around the holidays, Thanksgiving into the Christmas holiday season, things kind of slow down a bit. And the end of last year was just nonstop. I mean, I was getting denial letters, you know, that were dated Christmas Eve, you know, type stuff, situation like that.
I saw one December 31st yesterday. I got the guy didn't even take off December 31st.
Right. So, and then into this year, it just seems, you know, the phones are busy. There's a lot more calls. It does seem that way, that it's more denials. You know, I tell people I am skewed. It's like no one calls me with good news about what their insurance company is doing for them. But you know, like you said, here we are in April. I mean, the year has flown by, and that's usually indicative of how busy work is. And I would say that it is on par from last year and exceeding, you know, in the beginning, that the insurance companies are reevaluating. I think that they are, you know, yes, we are quite a ways away from COVID, but I think, you know, the things we've discussed, there's a readjustment in the way they're going to take a look at things and the way that they're going to handle things. How can they make it more streamlined, efficient for themselves to be able to turn through cases? And I've also noticed too, where, you know, they're not, you know, allowing for extensions on applications. Like I just was retained by someone recently, and, you know, within the past, not even week, and her doctors haven't had a chance to respond. I requested, you know, an additional 30 days, said, we'll toll your review time. So they're not, you know, violating their time. Like, no, she had told us we had all the information, so we're just going to do the review and we'll let you know. And if it's bad, you can appeal it, you know? So it's like, I think that they're just really trying to just hit the boxes of, you know, we did X, Y, and Z, deny the claim if needs be, instead of putting the work into analyze and review.
From my perspective, I've seen an increase in the denials, especially, and when I say that, the initial stage, you know, when people are applying, and for things that I look at and be like, wow, they denied it just because of that. And it's kind of like how you started, like, that's all they used. Like, it's kind of like they were trained to basically be like, just take this claim, throw it to our in-house doctor or nurse, and if they find no restrictions or any kind of limitation, just deny, and let's see if they appeal. Then we'll really evaluate it.
Yep.
And I'm seeing more of that.
Yep.
Whereas in the past, I might have seen them maybe go to 2 or 3 different internals and do a more detailed job in terms of having a basis for denying. And now it's like more towards the bare minimum. And Alex, you said before something like, I don't know if they're being cheap or they're being, used another word like stingy or whatever, but they are being cheap because they are businesses. You know, like, I got these stocks up behind me or whatever, but as a coincidence, but most of them are publicly traded companies. They have shareholders, they have private investors. They're in business to make money. And if they can cost cut and do the bare minimum, and someone else came in and said, look, under the law, this is all you have to do, that's all they're going to do. That's all they've ever wanted to do. And the more shrewd they can get, and I think you're seeing it being more shrewd. And you said reverting back to 8-10 years ago, goes back even more of that, where there were multi-state investigations and multi-state settlements of multiple different companies saying the claims handling you're doing, it's not a full and fair review. It's not reasonable what you're doing. And I think when the state investigators went away and they figured, oh, well, we're doing it this way and no one's saying anything, and they're like, let's start to lean back to how we used to do things until they get hit again. Yeah, until they get hit again, that's what they're going to do. So we're aware of all those things. We're seeing the trends. It's still not necessarily not preventing us from winning our appeals with the amount of evidence that we're able to put in, but it is resulting in more upfront denials and more on-claim denials for people who are on claim. Because whether you're applying or you're on claim, they're going to do the same shoddy review. And if they get a basis deny it, guess what? They take that number out of their reserves. They're not paying that person. They know it's going to be a minimum, 180 days usually with an appeal if you take all that time, or when they send it in and then they take their 45 and their 45, 90 days. So they know for 6 months or so, they're not going to have to pay that. And it's also work off of that person's desk. So It's the sad part of what they do, but we always talk about ways to avoid that. We represent people to help prevent denials, and obviously we know how to help them if they get denied. So thank you guys for sharing your thoughts on the trends for long-term disability denial trends for 2025.
If you have a short-term or long-term disability insurance denial, feel free to reach out to myself or any of our long-term disability insurance lawyers. No matter where you live in the country, we'll always provide you with a free consultation, and we're available to represent claimants nationwide.